Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove. I'm English. Across the table from me is Taylor Rockwell. He's American.
He is.
And I'll call that out today because I think that's going to be a theme of today's show.
There's a couple of them.
There certainly is, right? Today's show is a Total Soccer Show listener questions special. Some of them with a transatlantic theme. I love a listener question show, and I believe you do too, Mr. Rockwell.
I do. I almost tweeted out, gotta love listener question show with the thing that I was Googling, but it might have given away an answer, so I didn't want to.
So why do we love listener question show?
Because they ask questions. First of all, sometimes it is just genuinely stuff that I've never thought of before, but other times it's stuff that I think I understand, but the more research you do, either the more you learn or the more you uncover or the more you're like, oh, no, this is totally wrong.
I agree. It was like stuff you took for granted and you're sort of like, oh, why is that the way things are? Yeah, okay. So, you ready for today's questions?
I think so.
Shall we start with David Roberts? David, thank you for this question. David asked us, why is it in soccer that players are sold or transferred for money as opposed to traded for other players like in American sports? So my initial answer is because they just are.
Yep.
But then that's what makes this a good question, right?
Yes. And I think actually, and again, the other part of answering listener questions is it helps me gain a greater appreciation for things. And in this case, it's Major League Soccer. Because I would say, switching this around, American sports do things a certain way. European sports tend to do them very differently. And Major League Soccer is really trying to straddle the difference. Because
Give me that way. That's true.
Okay,
Yes.
because I'm going to take the American
They even
part
invented
of this
fake
one.
money.
There you go. It's perfect. But I'm going to take the American part of this one first.
Okay.
And the answer, I would say, is that because in the United States, or in North American leagues, rather, NBA, MLB, whatever, those are the best leagues in the world for those sports. The NBA, I would say, is the best basketball league in the world. Because of that, they have made it very strict in terms of who can play there. I did some researching. Basically, to be in the NBA, you have to have either come through the draft or been eligible for the draft.
Oh, really?
So you can't just go out and sign this Greek power forward. He has to have been eligible for the draft and not been drafted, or you have to draft him. You can't just go out and sign people.
So you can't just find someone in, say, China and just be like, hey, be on my team.
Nope.
You have to then put him through the draft, which means you can lose him.
Exactly, because it's all about parity. It's all about making sure that nobody can just go out and have scouting networks everywhere and get really, really good because they sign all the prospects. The prospects have to come through or have been eligible.
I feel like I'm getting the answer to my question, because when I read David's question, my question was, obviously players are bought and sold for transfer fees and money. Why in America are they traded? That's weird.
So then
that's the answer.
So then if you think about it, then if you have to have come through the draft, then you have a finite number of players who are eligible, and the ones who don't get, you have, I think it's Boban, he plays for the Clippers. He's one who wasn't drafted, then got signed. Now he is an important player, but generally speaking, the players who end up getting signed after being draft eligible aren't very good, if that makes sense. As in, they didn't get drafted in any of the rounds and then later on get signed.
Leftovers.
The idea would be that they're leftovers, exactly. So, with that in mind, you look at, then you've got all the best talent in the NBA. You're going to trade for that talent. You're not going to try to go out and sign people who didn't get picked up on the off chance they might be the diamond in the rough.
But has there ever been a chance of a system where sort of an NBA team is just like, hey, we'll give you $10 million for that player?
I mean, I think that's what the ABA was. I could be wrong on that one, but I'm pretty sure they threw out some pretty lucrative contracts to get people on board.
Well, I have the history of why the transfer fee system exists in the rest of soccer, which starts in Europe and really starts in England in the 1800s, as most of soccer does, right?
Yes.
Yeah?
Sorry to interject. I just wanted to add, the thing that I was going to Google that would give it away is why, I think it was were the Spurs able to sign Boban. Because it was well, how did they get him if he wasn't drafted?
How did they get him?
I think it was that he was eligible for the draft. Nobody picked him. And then after several
Can you
years...
sneak someone in the draft and just be like, shh?
I guess so.
Spread the word. Boban's bad. Don't get Boban. And then you get him.
It's possible.
In the 15th round.
I guess you could maybe do that sneakily. But I think he was eligible in 2010 and then didn't get signed until 2015, I think it was. So basically he just got really good in Europe. And they're like, oh, yeah, that guy. Oh, he was eligible? Well, then let's sign him.
So the short answer is essentially single entity in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Because it makes sure that you go through the system,
Yeah.
and then everyone's within the system, and then you have to work within the system. Fair? Okay. In Europe, it's a little different, and it all starts in England in the 1800s, as I said. It used to be there were no transfer fees. The system was this in the late 1800s.
I think we're laying the groundwork for a dark history.
Before things got professional, you basically could play for whoever you wanted, right? You could play for one team one week, and then you could just change jerseys, play for another team another week. It was very much just like you played for a team because that's who your buddies were. It's kind of like how we play for a team because that's who we know, right? You can sign for other teams.
It's like the indoor facility here in Richmond where we've seen players play 3 games back to back to back.
There is one gentleman that we've faced 3 weeks in a row at least for 3 different teams. Yeah. People in Richmond know who he is.
And you have to believe that that wouldn't go over so well if Eden Hazard was playing for Chelsea one week, Man City the next week, and then Arsenal the third week.
And then just occasionally maybe guesting for Huddersfield.
Yeah. It's like, what now?
So that was the system.
You guys don't have enough? All right, sure, I'll hop in.
That was the system, okay. Then the Football Association kind of in 1885, it says in my notes, started to organise things. They said you have to register and sign for a team for 1 year. So the system was you signed for, Bolton Wanderers. You had to play for Bolton for the whole season. End of the season, that's over. You can then next season be like, I want to play for Aston Villa. You just go play for Aston Villa. Bolton couldn't stop you, right? You just had to commit to a season, then you could go wherever you want afterwards, okay? Which actually kind of makes sense, right? Yeah. Then, so the Football Association, then the Football League gets involved and sets up, the Football League with the various divisions and the up and down in 1888. And they bring in a rule that essentially you can't go and join another team without your team's permission. And the reason they did this is to stop the big teams at the top of the table sort of wandering around and being like, oh, hey, really good player who plays for a smaller team. Why don't you come play for us? And then the smaller club doesn't get compensated. So you had to get the permission of the other team by paying a fee for the transfer of that player's registration. Hence, transfer fee.
There we are. But not a registration fee?
There probably was some admin fee, a Ticketmaster style fee, convenience fee back in the day.
But then it grows from there and morphs from there because now another, I would say, obstacle to having trades, as we saw in this past window, is that you can trade 2 players, but those 2 players, in the form of Mkhitaryan and Alexis Sanchez, they still have to agree to new contracts before that can go through.
Yes.
Not the case in American sports, where
your contract's with the league, right?
Your contract's with the league. So if you get traded from the Bucks to the Timberwolves, if you have a 2-year deal, you still have a 2-year deal. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, one final bit of trivia that I found.
You can obviously sign extensions and things like that. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But
the key thing is
you don't get to be like, nope.
In European soccer, at least, you start fresh every time you sign for a new team. Your whole contract gets renegotiated. I found the first sort of transfer fee that everybody knows about is 1893, which is when they sort of introduced this rule about registration. £100 for Willie Groves.
And back then it was too much. Papers were all over the place. It's a record transfer fee.
Madness. From West Bromwich Albion to Aston Villa. Yeah. So it makes me think maybe some sort of distant relative, even though he's got an extra letter to me. Willie Groves, West Brom to Aston Villa, £100.
I missed that part. I thought you were just saying it was a distant relative because they were from roughly the same area as you.
Well, he was Scottish. He was a Scottish player who'd come down to England to seek his footballing fortune.
You've been hiding that accent? He dropped the S to make him seem more English, maybe?
Yes. That's what it is. Yeah, my family just dropped a letter off.
Yeah.
So
I like it.
Have we explained the difference? I think we have, right?
I think so.
Essentially, we've explained how the 2 systems developed, right? Which is the reason it happens.
Indeed. But I think also it is worth noting that, going back to the American sports thing for 1 second, because you've got all those teams in the top tier, it would be the equivalent of if you had the Champions League as your actual domestic league, which doesn't make sense, but you get what I'm getting at. Then you might see more transfers because the idea then would be that they're all in one league, they're abiding by the same rules, they have the same regulations and whatever, so you can maybe have some swap deals. Still unlikely. But the point I'm getting at is that in the NBA, you're trading from Detroit to Washington, still in the same country, whereas you've got immigration rules and player registration rules that maybe you can't just swap an Argentinian for an Italian player between those two countries. You've got international rules that you also have to deal with.
That makes sense to me. It also makes MLS all the more interesting as a sort of weird hybrid thing, right? That has to exist in the world and also has to exist in American sports. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but in fact, I'm confident.
Trades and transfers and allocation money trades and all that.
But there's I guarantee you that if you had the NBA model of nope, if we trade you, you have to go. Pretty sure there's some workers' rights issues there with we just swapped you with this player in this country. You're moving now.
Oh, you mean around the world?
That would not go so well.
Yeah, so it's not just Aleko Eskandarian.
Forced labor doesn't go so well.
Moving from New York to DC and barely getting a chance to unpack his suitcase. If you were moved from, say, England to
I'm glad
Spain,
you did it. Okay,
right?
See, okay.
England to Spain. You'd still be sort of I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah. I was wondering what country you're going to go with. I sidestepped that one.
Or even Spain to England. If it suddenly was but it's cold there. I like it here in Spain. It's nice.
I live in the Canary Islands, and now I've got to go live in Newcastle.
Playing for Mallorca.
This is not the same at all.
which I believe is a Balearic. Anyway, so should we move on to today's second question, which is similarly transatlantic themed?
We definitely should, but I have to ask, was it Asprilla that was told that Newcastle was on the beach and he was like, perfect, I want to live on the beach?
Yes.
Yeah, that would not go so well.
You can see the sea.
You can.
All right.
Through your tears.
Next question, through your brain. Next question is from Corey Walters, who asks, in all, quote, American, unquote, sports, NFL, MLB, NHL, college, I think college is a sport.
Yep.
The home team comes second when listing the match participants, i.e., when the Ravens play the Bears in Chicago, it's listed as Ravens v. Bears or Baltimore v. Chicago. That makes sense to me because it's literally Baltimore at Chicago, all caps on the at. Why is it that soccer does this differently? Why does soccer list the home team first? Before you answer, Taylor, I would say, obviously the home team goes first because that's what I grew up with, so it just seems normal to me. Why on earth do Americans do it the wrong way around?
But see, I think actually that's very important because I do think that
it's
question...
cultural.
Well, the question is a little bit chicken or the egg because to Corey's point, like, yes, it makes sense to say it's Baltimore at New England, but that makes sense to you because that's the way you've learned it. If you learned it as New England are hosting Baltimore, then it would seem normal.
Yep.
And I would say without going too much into...
Is that the answer?
No. I would say, without going into too much detail, because I know it sort of is like, well, the rules weren't actually codified, and actually this team could do that. The general consensus answer is basically it comes from baseball. Baseball was the first professional sport in the United States. Although it was unofficially a rule, basically it was always the home team bats second. And so you have the first team, the away team, listed first on the scorecard, and then the home team coming underneath. So basically that's how it would then end up getting listed, and so I think that's where it evolved from. So for example, I think like one of the first NFL teams were the Chicago Bears. They played in Wrigley Stadium, Wrigley Field. So then when you're keeping score, you'd have the home team listed second because that's how it would be in baseball. It grows from there.
Yes, that's a great answer. Love it. Okay, we answered that.
I think so.
Well done.
But I guess the question would be then why do European teams around the world, do home team first?
Well, I can't say that I researched this because there's no answer to it. It's just obvious that team's at home, so they go first, right?
I did like the idea of everyone else in the world isn't polite, and we in the United States are like, no.
More welcoming.
Home team gets to be first.
Be my guest.
Yeah.
Be my guest.
I do enjoy that it seems to annoy everybody regardless, because if you're a soccer fan watching the NFL, you're like, that doesn't make sense. Why are they wearing white? Aren't they home? Or why are they wearing this? They're away. That doesn't make any sense. I don't get this.
I also think it was, speaking of MLS again, it was an interesting way to track the Europeanization of Major League Soccer in terms of like how it's presented. In the early days, they did the right? Or they did the home team listed second. And I can't remember the exact year, but they definitely at some point were like, all right, we'll get on board with soccer fans. Let's go home team first.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, next question.
Next question. I think it was right around the time they stopped the clock from counting down.
There we go. Jeff Root. Jeff Root wants to know, do shirt sponsors have an effect on league or team credibility? Is the value of the sponsorship more important than the nature of business of the sponsor, i.e. Xbox or YouTube versus BMO or Advocare? Does the public perception of a sponsor actually have an effect on shirt sales or club reputation? For example, again, Qatar or a gambling website?
I would say maybe it has an effect if it is locally related. So Seattle, Microsoft, Xbox, that kind of connects.
Yes.
But generally speaking, I would say it's the opposite. I would say it's the shirt that is the important aspect. There's a reason why AIG and Aon, I still think most people couldn't tell you what they do. There's a reason
they sponsor Man United occasionally.
There's a reason why they spend more than $20 million to do that. It's because they want their name known.
Yeah, but they kind of... I think they messed up with Man United because I know that they sponsor Man United. Still don't know what they do.
Global security and intelligence and IT, question mark?
And AIG I only kind of know because of the financial collapse.
There's that.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Not great.
So weirdly, my answer is no, and I don't know. And one of the reasons is because, so the Premier League, the most moneyed league in the world, a bunch of those teams just have weird gambling sponsors or payday loan sponsors, like loads of them. And you don't, for some reason, I think because there's so many of them, you don't think of it as being necessarily like a bad thing for that team.
Yeah.
And I think it's a safety in numbers thing. If there was only one team with a payday loan sponsor, maybe they'd look worse than all the others.
Maybe.
You know what I'm saying?
But I still think it just comes down to dollars and cents. The only outlier would be
You mean pounds and pence?
Sure. The only outlier would be when you have cultural norms.
Yep.
The one that comes to mind there would be I think it was a university team in England, Kent maybe in England. Their football team was going to be sponsored by Pornhub, and that was immediately nixed. I think they were banned as long as that was on the jersey. Then I think they were looking for sponsorship in Serie A. No one bid on that one because I think there are ones where, regardless of money, there is the sociological aspect of it that maybe people won't want on their shirt.
Yeah.
Because I do think people maybe are less inclined to wear a soccer jersey that has a porn site as opposed to, say, a global intelligence or security firm.
That makes sense. And I would agree with your original point, which I think is the key thing, is that when it's a local sponsor, people are definitely more into it.
Yeah.
Right?
I would say,
Wolves had Amanda's Paints as a sponsor way back.
Yeah.
They're like a local paint company. And we're also kind of weirdly politically progressive, and they were very popular locally because everyone who worked for them was real happy. So that definitely had like a good vibe to it. Newcastle for a while were sponsored by Newcastle Brown Ale, and they had that the star in the Newcastle Brown Ale logo. And it was when Newcastle were really good. That was much better than when they were sponsored by a payday loan company and not doing so well. Getting relegated.
It's not ideal. The only outlier I would say would be you can have it go slightly sour if you didn't have a sponsor, Barcelona, looking in your direction.
Yes.
For the longest time, no sponsor on the front. Then I think they donated the front of their shirt to UNICEF.
Yeah.
And now it's Qatar Foundation whatever it is. But it's still not ideal.
I think they couldn't refuse.
Yeah, exactly. But even then, I think it was like a little bit of a backlash because they didn't have one for so long.
Well, that's
and then everybody was like, but also, yeah.
It's like when you take a strong stance that everyone's really positive about, and then you sort of do the exact opposite of that.
Yeah. But even then, I think no one cares anymore.
So we answered Jeff's question?
I think so.
Yes. I mean, the answer is mostly no, but sometimes yes. There we go. Brian McIntyre has a question. Brian says, I was recently reading a post on the Chelsea SB Nation blog, which asserted that FIFA international breaks are pointless. I went and found this. I read it. It was actually about the Premier League introducing a winter break and how they could possibly do that. And one of the suggestions was that maybe a way to do it would be to get rid of some of the international breaks. And there's actually an editor's note at the bottom that said, because they're essentially pointless. Right?
Okay.
So Brian wants to know, he says, it's not the first time I've read or heard assertions like that. So why all the hate in England for the FIFA international breaks? Is it a majority of fans that despise them or just a vocal minority? Is this view similarly held throughout Europe?
Now, when we answer listener questions, we also recognize that we are opening ourselves up to criticism because we don't always know everything.
Yep.
And my question is going to be, this might seem stupid because I don't know if MLS always respects them, but don't you have to respect international dates?
I mean, you respect them in terms of your players mostly go and play for the national team, right? But I think what Brian is asking about is the thing in England. Maybe you're not aware of this.
I was mostly referring to the SB Nation article where they were like, let's just do away with international breaks.
Well, I mean, they're proposing don't have so many FIFA international breaks and we can play more Premier League matches in those times and get the season done with faster and then introduce our own break.
I get that. But what I'm saying is then, wouldn't that then be like, FIFA has to do that? Like the Premier League can't just be like, let's do away with those. It has to be FIFA changing
Yes, I mean, I think you're getting too lost in the mechanism.
That seems like a silly argument.
All right, you're getting lost in the mechanism there. What Brian's essentially asking is, you do that. Why is there so much disrespect for those FIFA international breaks, especially when they're friendlies? And you've heard people call it the interlull. Right, where essentially people think their Premier League season is off and running, they're all into it.
Yeah.
But then there's a whole weekend or more that's gone because England is playing France in a friendly, right? And people get really frustrated with that.
I think it's because part of it, maybe weirdly, is that those are poorly timed dates. That it is sort of like the fourth week of the Premier League. Oh, we're having a break.
There is that one that happens just as the Premier League is getting started, right? Yeah.
Yes,
I think it's the September ones.
Yeah, and I feel like it always ends up being the week after that. It will be like the Manchester Derby. And so you're like, the Manchester Derby is it's next weekend. Oh, man. And so there's that part of it,
and
too.
And then Sergio Aguero got injured playing for Argentina.
Ooh, that's
that often happens is that a player gets injured in an international friendly and they're missing for a big Premier League game. So that's the reason why is that people are super into the Premier League or people are super into the team they support. and they feel like these international dates are getting in the way. I think that's the reason.
That makes sense. I'm confused, though, because from 1986 to like 2013, most Manchester United players got hurt right before the international break, so I'm not sure why that happened.
There's probably someone involved between those specific dates. I can't think who it could be.
I don't know what it could be. Just something in the water. But I think that's part of it. And then I think it is also just that if you are really into your league, if you're enjoying all of the games, if you're enjoying match of the day, if you live in England and all of the coverage that surrounds it, to then have it be like, all right, England are going to go play Slovakia now in an international friendly. It's like, oh, okay, great. Like it's not to go from competitive, 19 competitive games or whatever every single week to none. Or that's not right. 10 competitive games. Oops, I don't know what I'm saying there. It's late.
More coffee. I
think that should help. But I think we open ourselves up. We're vulnerable.
Yeah.
It changes like just that vibe of like, oh, there's so much to watch, there's so much to do, and suddenly it's like, oh, there's one game late on Saturday night, and that's it. But now I got to spend time with my family.
Here's the thing. I think the reason maybe Brian's picked up on this is because I get the feeling that here in the US, even in the current moment when things are bad, people are super into the US men's national team, like really into it. Like it kind of is the most important thing. Whereas definitely in England, I know people, I'm not one of them, I think I'm a little weird, but I know people who their club team is the most important thing. There are lots of people who will say, I would rather see, I'm going to pick a team at random, so please don't take this the wrong way. I would rather see Liverpool win the Premier League than England win a World Cup. You know what I'm saying? Like, just easy decision for them. That would be really hard for me, that decision. I think I would lean England over Wolves winning something.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
And it's just that order of precedence. And then people get into England for the World Cup month. And then after that, they're more like, oh, no, forget about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas I love to see Gareth Southgate experiment in a friendly. I'm super excited about it, so it gets me going.
But I think there might be a reason for that. I bet historically it's England and fans of the England, like living in England, are the ones who are the most critical of the international break. And I think it's because there is oftentimes frustration with the English national team, either failure to qualify or not looking as good as they should or what have you. This is a very exciting time for England. There are a lot of young, very exciting world-class players.
Yeah, but
I think
still,
that factors.
if you did a word cloud, there's like word clouds that you get for tags of how people feel about England, the biggest word would be rubbish.
Right.
Because that's what keeps happening.
And I think that this is the longest down period in like modern U.S. soccer history.
Yep.
Which is, I mean, like in terms of the men's senior national team, I'll say that caveat. And so I wonder if that bleeds into it too, that now you have that sort of like we don't have a coach, we don't really know what's happening, we don't know who's going to get called in, and it kind of takes away from the excitement of that international break a little bit.
It does, but still MLS is not even popular with all US men's national team fans, whereas the Premier League is watched by all England fans.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's not quite the competition.
Yes.
I think that answers the question.
I think so.
I'm going to stop saying that. I'm going to be more confident. We answered the question.
Yeah.
The only part we didn't touch was, is this true in other countries? I don't know. I don't know how French people feel about this. I don't know how Italian people feel about this. I don't know how German people feel about this. I would guess that they all feel better because they've all at some point won the World Cup in recent memory. So they probably have more positive feelings towards their national team.
The only one I can comment on was Turkey from living there. And
Yeah,
I would say that no, people were up for Turkish national team games, even though at that time they were not qualifying for things. It wasn't nearly as good as it had been in the past, but there was an element of like the nationalism of, hey, when they may all play for different clubs, but they come together, they try to be greater than the sum of their parts.
And there's definitely part of English culture that's very weird about nationalism and pride in your country and all that sort of stuff that makes the relationship with the England team a little bit weird. Yeah. That's a whole other topic to maybe not get into.
Actually, sorry, and then I'll be done. I do also wonder if maybe if you are, say, Spain or Brazil, where you have players all over the world, it might be exciting for you to get that opportunity to have them all come back and play a friendly.
I mean, if Brazil ever played in Brazil, that would be helpful.
Well, there is that. But Spain, for example, where you've got players playing in La Liga, but you've got plenty of Spanish players around the world, mostly England. But so like you get that chance to see them playing for your national team in a way that, I mean, most players playing for England or who have played for England are playing in England. You see them every single week. So maybe it's like, well, I could be seeing you play for a better club team.
And you play against them. Like you can be annoyed with Dele Alli if you're an Arsenal fan and sort of not be then as pumped to watch him play for England.
This is probably true.
Yep. All right. So, another question. Marcus McCarthy.
How about I ask this one? I feel like you've had to ask all of them. So
okay.
I'll ask this one.
I thought I was getting good at it, but okay.
Yeah, you're doing your best. Marcus McCarthy. I have teams in my head like Ajax and Porto that are great at developing youth, but I don't really know. What clubs have recently and historically had the best development programs? Could or should an MLS team or the United States Soccer Federation try to hire whomever runs these programs away from them? I feel like if we were going to spend a lot of money, like Klinsmann, on a position, I'd support this more than the head coach. Do you agree?
Should we take the first part first?
Sure.
Okay. Teams in my head like Ajax and Porto, great developing youth talent. What teams recently historically had the best development programs? Definitely Ajax.
Yeah.
So many players coming through Ajax. Even right now, they have two centre-backs, like one's 20 and one's 18. They have Justin Kluivert, Patrick Kluivert's son.
Matthias de Ligt.
Yes, the teenager Kluivert on the wing. Bunch of teenagers,
I mean, and then historically, Schneider, Seedorf, Van der Vaart, Nigel de Jong, those are just like the recent ones. And then you keep going and going and going and going and going.
Johan Cruyff.
I've heard of him.
Endless. Okay, so definitely Ajax. They're sort of the gold standard in that term. Porto, I would say, are actually second fiddle in Portugal in terms of youth development to Sporting Club de Portugal, better known as Sporting Lisbon.
I would agree. I would say we'll get to who Sporting CP have had rather. Porto, I think it's because you see all those stories about how they're like how much they bought players for versus how much they sold them for, and there's that huge disparity because they're very good at identifying talent and then developing that talent and then selling it on. But a lot of times that is a 19-year-old who's been playing in the Brazilian league for 2 years and then they sign them over.
Yeah.
Whereas Sporting seem to have more of a proven track record of developing Portuguese players.
You seem nervous about saying this. I think there are two names that you can say that categorically prove that Sporting Club de Portugal are the best in Portugal and maybe in the world at developing talent.
João Moutinho and Nani. No, kidding. Cristiano Ronaldo and Luis Figo. Although João Moutinho and Nani did come through Sporting CP's academy.
But, I mean, those four combined, like magnificent footballers.
And Quaresma.
Which may be the best player of all time.
Yeah. I think that's probably fair.
Best outside of the foot player of all time, with all due respect to Jordan Morris.
Yes.
And then, of course, Barcelona
That'd
is
be the other
also a big one. The famous La Masia. We don't need to make the case for that.
I think it's La Masia. I'm kidding.
Don't you dare.
Kidding.
So, to the second part of the question.
You don't want me to list all the Barca players? You sure?
We're good.
Okay, fine.
Guardiola. To the second part of the question. Would we be better hiring some of the people who run these... Bless you. Hiring away some of the people who run these programs to the United States, to the Soccer Federation, or to Major League Soccer? My answer is no.
I agree.
And my reasoning...
we're going to keep going? I thought we were just done.
Is that one man does not a system make, right?
Correct.
It's about the entire infrastructure that exists at La Masia, or at Sporting Club de Portugal, or at Ajax, right? It's the entire infrastructure that exists, and that infrastructure is tied into those cities, to Amsterdam, to Lisbon, to Barcelona, right? You catch the
I did.
So
you're the worst.
You could hire the head of those academies or the directors, bring them over to the US. Drop them in, I'm picking American City, drop them in Portland. They don't know Portland, and the rest of the infrastructure is not around them. They're not going to magically create players around them, right? It's not magic. So I would say if we're going to invest money, instead of investing in a coach, we're going to invest it in something youth-related, you invest it in infrastructure.
I agree.
Not in specific people.
I mean, yeah, I maybe in terms of like hiring away scouts, possibly, but I would say... Again, I go
coaches. I go youth coaches because they're the ones that really... Look, we watched... I forgot his second name, but Gary.
Yeah.
The Spanish coach who was coaching...
I think it was Basque, which is probably why you can't remember.
Yes, it was coaching some U19 players at the United Soccer Coaches thing in Philadelphia. You could see the quality of coaching he was bringing. More guys like him would be ideal.
Yeah.
The one guy at the top doesn't matter as much. It's the specific coaches.
Yeah, I agree with that. I still think we should hire away Mexico's technical director, but whatever.
I mean, it's too late for Gonzalez.
Even so, he's still good. He's still good at what he does.
All right, so that's where I'd spend the money. And if we were going to spend it not on a head coach, I think that's what I'd do. I'd invest it in infrastructure. Yeah. Would you like me to ask the next question?
Sure.
Okay.
It's a big one.
Mark Jones asks, or tells us first of all, that UEFA announced this week that they would take no further action against Spartak Moscow player Leonid Mironov, who was alleged to have racially abused young Englishman Ryan Brewster. How very UEFA, says Mark. He says there have been a lot of claims of racial abuse lately, and it seems implausible that they are all unsubstantiated. It also seems like this is trending in the wrong direction. Do you agree that this is worse than it used to be? And is it spillover from nationalist political movements, or has this always happened and I'm just more clued in because of reporting?
And this is where I always feel the need to clarify that we are two white guys recording this podcast in the United States, so grain of salt there. I'm going to say that it is better only because I don't think this even used to be news in the past.
Yes.
I think that if you talk to lots of black players who played in England, say, in the 80s and even like early 90s, mid 90s, they probably heard way worse on a consistent basis. And I think that it was just sort of
talk to Patrice Evra.
Yeah, exactly. Recently. I think it's but see, I would say that's an example of where you do start to hear more about it. Whereas I think for a lot of people, it really was like, I think I've heard John Barnes talk about like people would throw a banana. Didn't he like someone throw a banana at him and he like took a bite out of it and threw it back?
He also backheeled it once.
Yeah, that was the one. Like it wasn't a thing. I mean, like it was a thing, but it wasn't as like widely covered from a this is terrible standpoint.
Yes.
That nowadays, if that happened, you would hear about it on every single news channel that talks about soccer. It would be front page of Reddit. It would be on Twitter. It would be covered. The club would be criticized.
We'd
for
have an
it.
emergency podcast as an example.
Yeah, and you would hear about it far more like widespread and with much more condemnation. Now that's from a media standpoint. I don't necessarily know if like UEFA have changed the way they police these things to make them much more punished, but I do think that they are no longer so widespread that they don't even merit talking about.
I think
Does
that's
that make
the thing.
sense?
Yeah, I think that you hear about incidents more, and we're specifically talking about a player and a player here, right? Not a crowd. But I think you hear about these incidents more, and they're reported more, but because there are fewer of them, weirdly. And the more reporting, we hope, leads to fewer incidents. And it's that weird balance that hopefully leads us to no incidents and therefore no reports sometime in our lifetime.
Yeah. I mean, that would be the goal. But I think that it is always really, really frustrating and depressing to hear that stuff still happens and does still happen, I will say, with not like widespread regularity, but with regularity on a widespread scale in the sense that like even as recently as like World Cup qualifying in 2014, maybe, was it Serbia and Italy, where there were lots of ultras and there was some allegations of racial abuse and of ethnic abuse. Like that still happens, and it does still happen with certain groups of fans, but it is something that we hear more about, and I think it gets more attention, and that makes me at least somewhat more optimistic for the future.
I haven't read too deeply into this, but my guess with this player, Leonid Mironov, I'm going to guess he did it, because why else would Rhian Brewster report it?
Yep.
But I'm also going to say my guess as to the reason why that UEFA are taking no further action is that they just can't find hard evidence, right? You would need like a recording of him saying it to have the definite evidence to go after him.
I believe
maybe that's what's lacking.
Yeah, and to his credit, Mark did include the actual language, which I think was like there is not enough evidence to substantiate like further investigation or to allow for charges to be brought.
How about this? I'm assuming this was like a UEFA Champions League youth match, so I'm assuming Mironov is, kind of a kid. How about we ban him from watching the World Cup? We kind of ground him to like really punish him in a way that UEFA can't.
If there's anyone that I trust to enforce regulations against their athletes, it's Russia.
Icarus did win Best Documentary, right?
I can't believe that country is hosting a World Cup.
No, me neither. We will definitely be talking about that at some point in the near future. I think this incident is kind of an example of why I'm not thrilled about that.
I can't believe that I'm more angry about Russia hosting a World Cup at this point than I am Qatar, but we'll leave that one alone for another day.
I made that flip recently as well. Should we move on?
Yeah, I'm not sure I feel good about that one since people are actively dying in Qatar, but... More on that another day when we decide to tackle World Cup hosting and bidding and all that good stuff.
Okay. Final question today comes from Joe Shoshnaki. Joe says, this is an interesting question. It starts with what sounds like a humble brag, but it all makes sense. So bear with us here. Joe says, I'm a pretty good recreational player, an impact player on any pickup game I join, and a key cog on the various men's league teams I've played on. My ball skills aren't sizzling, but I move to the open space either to receive the ball myself or pull defenders to create space. I'm also a disruptor on defence, forcing rushed passes, denying passing lanes, and directing teammate coverage. So Joe's established a good base there of he's a smart player who understands the game. Here's his question. Given my strong grasp of fundamentals, why am I so very bad at analysing tactics and movements of teams as a spectator? For instance, when commentators point out that after a sub, a team has just switched formations, it is news to me as I noticed nothing. How can I translate my first-hand knowledge of the game to better tactical understanding? Are there tutorials I can watch where people break down a game as it goes? Is this a common thing among players? Have you encountered others like me?
Yeah, I would say me. For starters, I find it really hard because I think, I'll speak for myself here, but I would assume this pertains to Joe a little bit, that in a game, if you've played soccer your whole life, or football for your people, Daryl, and most of the world, you know what you're doing. Like, you know, and even if you are playing a variety of positions and you feel like you can do it well, that's because you know how to play those positions.
You just know, like, you know how to breathe, right? But it's hard to describe.
Yeah, but it's also a thing that you have had the training and the coaching and the experience to know, like, oh, I'm going to receive with the outside of my foot so I can play it this way. Or I need to challenge this header at this time to make sure this person doesn't win it cleanly. Like, you know how to do that stuff to the point where it becomes instinctual. But I think when you try to translate that to watching a game, it seems like it should just naturally happen, but it doesn't. And for me, it's because when I tried to do it, at least when I first got into seriously watching soccer games, it was that I couldn't focus, that I was, oh, the ball's there, but what's that guy doing? But what's he doing? And you're sort of focusing on everything, so you're focusing on nothing. And then you don't really understand what's happened at the end because you have been trying to focus on what both teams are doing and what the goalkeeper's doing and what that coach is saying. And, oh, look at that fan. And maybe I just have ADD, but I think that's probably part of it.
It's like in the old days where you would try and do your homework and watch TV and do something else, and you end up doing nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I used to think that I could do all those things, and I have slowly learned in my life that no, you can't.
And I will say, when we watch games in the office now, it's pretty much like we watch the screen and we think about what's happening.
Yeah,
right?
But I mean, I'll say full disclosure view behind the curtain. Like, I used to be like trying to tweet and look stuff up, and I remember you'd be like, "Can you just watch?" Because I would be like, "Wait, what happened? Oh, I wonder why he did that." And you'd be like, "Well, because that just happened 5 minutes ago."
Yeah.
So I think that is part of it. Is that if you're watching in a bar or with a group of people?
Oh yeah, Joe didn't say how he was watching and where. Yeah.
That is another element, and I would say the best way to watch isn't by yourself, though. It's with somebody else who's equally intent on watching a game.
Because they can focus your attention.
Yeah, and not necessarily rooting for a team, though, because then you can get that element of like, oh, that guy's bad. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, this is so awful that we're losing, as opposed to, oh, how did that goal come about?
Yep.
And that's maybe an impossible task, because I don't know if there are many people who are just like, let's just academically watch a game. That seems like something Jonathan Wilson would do and no one else. But I think that's part of it, is watching a game with the goal of understanding what's happening. That's part of it to start.
I agree with that. Okay, so we've got a couple of tips maybe for Joe.
Sure.
There's the obvious ones. I say obvious just because we've said these a lot, because people ask similar-ish questions, like how to watch games. Actually, there's a podcast we recorded only a month ago. I think it was called How to Watch Soccer. Search for that title, Joe, and you'll find it. But I think the essential thing was to not worry about the ball for a little bit and just have in your head, like, okay, ask yourself a question. What formation is that team playing? And then you just forget what the ball's doing, look at the screen, and just like count the defenders, count the midfielders, check people's positioning, and that's the only way to figure it out. You really can't watch the ball and be invested in where the ball's going and then just magically absorb what formation the team's playing. You have to focus on that for a good 30 seconds to a minute to 2 minutes to figure it out. So it's almost like ask yourself a question, do it one at a time, go down the list.
And to let Joe off the hook a little bit, it is like to his point about like, oh, when the commentator says they switched formations and it's new to him, part of that is because a lot of the time that commentator is in the stadium. And if you're watching a game in person, you see the whole field 100% of the time, unless you're looking away. But
so you see the left back even if he's not in the camera.
Exactly.
shots.
And like I remember the first time this became like crystal clear to me, strangely it took me this long, was when Charlie Davies came back to DC United. And I remember texting you like, oh, he's doing the Inzaghi thing of like he stays offside all the time. He's always 5 yards offside, waiting for that one moment to jump back onside. And
it's now known as the Luis Suarez thing.
Yeah, sure, exactly. But you wouldn't know that if you weren't in the stadium, because if the camera is focused on when DC are defending, you don't know that Charlie Davies is doing that. You'll only notice that when suddenly the ball is played over the top and he's on. Yeah. And it's like, wow, okay, that just happened. I didn't notice that was happening.
You kind of assume he was just standing next to the defender.
Whereas the commentator who might have been observing that the entire time will be able to say, oh, he's been doing that the whole time. That's what his game is based on.
So get a wider television.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the answer.
It's not how
Go
it
to
works,
every
right?
single game in person. I just need to say that does play a part, that like I do think that's why you're able to notice things that maybe people watching at home might not if you're there in person.
Okay. Any other tips for Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit a lot of them with just sort of like ways to watch the game. Maybe don't get obsessed with the ball. I would say maybe watch on mute, because sometimes if I'm listening to what the commentator is saying, then I will get distracted and focus on, oh, that's interesting that he made 111 appearances for, this Bulgarian team, and his dog is named after that Bulgarian team. Meanwhile, that player does like complete 6 dribbles in a row and scores a goal. That can be a little distracting.
Here, Levski.
That's a good name, actually. It's 2 syllables ending in a vowel. That's the Monks of New Skeet's Guide to Training Dogs.
There we go.
That's an acceptable name.
All right, next dog's going to be called Levski.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, you could have a dog named Levski and a dog named Sophia. I think that works.
There you go. Thank you. That's a perfect note to end on.
Okay.
Thank you to everybody for today's questions. If you would like to ask us a question for the show, please go to totalsoccershow.com/questions. Totalsoccershow.com/questions. Some tips on questions that we like to answer, which are the ones we're most likely to choose. Actually ask us a question, which means there's a question mark on the end of it. It's a question. We also like the idea of questions that you actually want to know the answer to. Like going back to the first question today, David Roberts' question, why is it a transfer fee instead of trades? I got the impression David genuinely just is curious and wants to know that, as opposed to, I think this thing, or please talk about this thing, right? That's not a question. We can't do that. I'm saying that just to not waste your time.
Yeah.
Fair? Okay.
I agree. I've been slightly distracted because there's one more thing that I wanted to say.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I know we moved on, but
that's fine.
I'm going to take us back to it because...
You got too much coffee.
There is there is one more thing I would say to Joe and people out there who want to learn more about how tactics evolve in a game and what managers are doing, is there is a cheat sheet, and that cheat sheet is what managers are doing is known. And if you're watching Liverpool, you know they're going to do high press. You know they're going to play a certain style. So identify how they're doing that. So say you see these 3 players putting pressure on the left back. Then you might think, oh, that's that high press, but it's these 3 players every time. Are they doing that with the right back too? Oh, they are. So it's these 3 guys are always triggering. And if you know sort of what they're roughly trying to do, that can help you as opposed to being like, well, let me watch this team that I know nothing about and try to figure out what's happening.
Yeah.
If you know little bits and pieces, that can help you sort of solve the puzzle a bit more.
The other secret, to how we do it, is essentially we'll often watch twice. And it's much easier to figure this stuff out when the game is over and the result is known, because then it's very easy to not be invested in the narrative, because the narrative is already determined because you're watching a game that's already happened.
Correct.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to do it.
And as yesterday's show will prove, if you watch an own goal 46 times, you'll learn 45 different things.
And still won't be sure of the answer.
Yes.
So, as I was saying before, I was so, not rudely, very politely interrupted. Go to totalsoccershow.com/questions to ask us a question. We really like questions. Also, if you are a subscriber, if you subscribe at $10 a month or more to support the Total Soccer Show, which you can do at totalsoccershow.com/join, we guarantee to answer 1 question per month. All right.
Taylor, one more thing to... No, I'm just kidding.
Taylor, we're going to be back, probably Sunday night or Monday morning, and I think we'll do the usual thumbs up, thumbs down, weekend review. Somewhere in there, it's Manchester United. It's Liverpool at Manchester United, 7:30 a.m.
Oh, boy.
Saturday morning.
Yes. I have a strange Sunday. My soccer schedule is off.
Man United bat second in that game.
Well, that's Saturday, right? That
yes.
game? Okay, yeah. And yes, they do. But, Sunday I've got a game at 9 and a game at 5. So we'll see.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
So you're doing a 9 to 5.
And then I guess I'm coming in to record after that?
So we could do Monday morning instead.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. If it's not there by Sunday night, you know why.
Then you know that my team lost.
It's because Taylor got fouled hard in the 5 o'clock game.
Also a possibility.
Taylor Rockwell, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
You are welcome. And if any listeners out there happen to be playing on the opposition team and would like that show on Monday morning, maybe let me score and maybe don't foul me, and you'll get that show on time. That's all I'm saying. Listeners, thank you for listening. Thank you for not tackling Taylor too hard. Indeed.
And we will talk to you again next week.